I'm a 26-year-old woman, and I've been no contact with my mother 52F and my younger sister, Amy 24F, for the past 3 years. This decision wasn't something I made lightly. I'd been trying to ignore the favoritism my whole life, convincing myself that maybe I was overreacting or reading too much into things. But eventually I couldn't deny it any longer. Here's how it all went down. Growing up, it was clear who the favorite child was. My mother never even tried to hide it. Amy was always the golden girl. She got everything she wanted: new clothes, expensive gadgets, and all the attention in the world. Meanwhile, I was the afterthought, the one who had to make do with hand-me-downs or go without. There were countless times when I'd ask for something simple, like new shoes for school, only to be told we couldn't afford it. The very next week, my mom would take Amy shopping for the latest iPhone or a designer handbag. It wasn't just about material things, though. It was the little moments, too. When I got good grades, it was barely acknowledged. But if Amy even slightly excelled at something, there'd be a whole celebration. The real breaking point, though, was the college fund. Ever since I was a kid, my mother had promised me there was a fund set aside for my education. She'd talk about it often, reassuring me that I wouldn't have to worry about student loans like she did. It was the one thing that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I mattered too. So you can imagine my shock when it was time to go to college and I found out the fund was empty, not a single cent left. I confronted my mother about it, thinking there had to be some mistake. But no, she admitted without a shred of guilt that she'd used the money for Amy's wedding. An extravagant wedding, by the way, with a designer dress, a fancy venue, and a honeymoon in Europe. When I asked why, she shrugged and said Amy needed it more. That was her reasoning. My future, my education, didn't matter because Amy needed a big, flashy wedding. I was devastated. I ended up taking out student loans and working 2 jobs just to get through college. It wasn't easy, but I managed. Meanwhile, Amy was off living her best life, oblivious to the fact that she'd taken something so important from me. I tried talking to my mother about it a few times after that, but every conversation ended the same way, with her brushing me off and acting like I was being unreasonable or selfish. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I cut contact with both of them. It felt like the only way I could protect myself. But going no contact didn't come without its own challenges. The extended family got involved, of course. My aunts and uncles started bombarding me with messages, accusing me of being ungrateful. They'd say things like, "Your mom did the best she could as a single parent, and you should be more understanding. She's only human." They couldn't see, or didn't want to see, the years of blatant favoritism and emotional neglect. To them, I was the bad daughter who abandoned her family for no reason. I started therapy around that time, and it was a lifesaver. For the first time, I had someone validating my experiences, helping me process the pain and the trauma. It wasn't an easy journey, but after a few years, I felt like I was finally starting to heal. I was moving on with my life, focusing on myself, and building something new away from the toxicity. Then, out of nowhere, my mother reached out. It had been 3 years of silence, and suddenly she wanted to talk. I remember staring at the message, my heart pounding. It was long and filled with overly sweet words about how much she missed me and how she wanted to make things right. It felt off, almost rehearsed. I couldn't help but feel suspicious. The timing seemed too convenient, especially since I'd recently heard from a cousin that Amy's marriage was falling apart and she was having serious financial troubles. It didn't take a genius to figure out that my mother might have ulterior motives. The more I thought about it, the more things started to add up. Amy was in trouble, and my mother was reaching out just when they might need a financial lifeline. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I did some digging, talking to a few family members who were still in touch with my mother. That's when I learned that she'd been telling everyone a very different story about why we weren't speaking. According to her, I was the villain, the ungrateful daughter who cut off her poor, lonely mother for no reason. She'd been painting herself as the victim, and most of the family believed her. The guilt-tripping messages from aunts and uncles started pouring in soon after. They all had the same tone, that I was being heartless, that my mother just wanted to reconnect, and that I should give her another chance. It was exhausting, but I held my ground. I knew what this was, a manipulative attempt to pull me back in. I wasn't about to fall for it. In the midst of all this chaos, something unexpected happened. My estranged father, who I hadn't spoken to in years, reached out. He'd heard about the situation through family gossip and wanted to offer his support. He apologized for not being there more when I was growing up, admitting that he'd failed me in a lot of ways. It was the first genuine apology I'd received from any parent, and it caught me off guard. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. I found out through the grapevine that my mother was actually in serious financial trouble herself. Years of reckless spending and bailing Amy out of her failed marriage had left her in a bad spot. Suddenly, her reaching out made perfect sense. It wasn't about making amends, it was about money. Despite everything, I agreed to meet her for coffee. I told myself it was just one meeting, that I'd hear her out and then decide what to do. I went in prepared for a confrontation, but even then, I wasn't ready for what happened next. Update 1. Underneath, I decided to meet my mother for coffee, just to see what she had to say. I'd already prepared myself for an emotional show, but she came in ready to perform at another level. She started crying almost immediately, apologizing for everything but never really taking responsibility. It was all about how she felt, how hard it's been for her without me. She kept saying she missed me, but it felt rehearsed. Then she started blaming me for abandoning the family, making it sound like I was the one who walked away for no reason. I sat there listening, but I didn't say much. I just wanted to hear what she'd try next. By the end of the meeting, it was clear she wasn't there to make amends. She was there to manipulate me into coming back. The moment I didn't immediately forgive her, the mask slipped, or her tone changed, and she started hinting at how family should help each other out. It was obvious she was setting the stage for a financial request. I decided then and there that I wasn't going to get sucked back in. I got up, told her I needed time to think, and walked out. The next morning, my phone was blowing up with messages from her. Long paragraphs, full of guilt-tripping lines about how she raised me on her own, how much she sacrificed, and how heartbroken she was. She threw in phrases like, "You're breaking my heart," and "I've always loved you, even when you turned your back on us." It was all classic emotional blackmail. She was trying every trick in the book to reel me back in. Then the extended family got involved. First, it was my aunts, sending me messages about how cruel I was being. They'd say things like, "Your mom's been crying nonstop," and "She just wants her family back together." They made it sound like I was the villain who had abandoned my poor, innocent mother. One of my aunts even sent a voice message, crying about how she couldn't understand why I was being so heartless. It was infuriating, but I didn't respond. I knew this was part of my mother's plan: get everyone else involved to pressure me. I took all of this to my therapist. We spent the whole session unpacking the manipulation tactics my mother was using. It was a relief to hear someone else validate what I was seeing, that it wasn't just in my head. My therapist helped me see that this wasn't about love or wanting a relationship, it was about control. My mother couldn't stand that I'd broken free, and now she was pulling every string she could to bring me back. Later that week, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. I heard the buzzer ring, and when I looked out the window, there she was, standing on the sidewalk with a dramatic, tearful expression. I didn't buzz her in, but she managed to get in when another tenant opened the door. Next thing I knew, she was banging on my door, crying loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. It was embarrassing and overwhelming. She was begging me to forgive her, saying she couldn't live without me. Neighbors were peeking out of their doors, watching the scene unfold. I felt trapped but also angry. I opened the door, told her this was not the place or time for this, and that she needed to leave. She kept crying, trying to push past me into the apartment. I stepped in front of her and firmly told her to go. When she realized I wasn't budging, she switched tactics again, turning on the tears and saying I was cruel for slamming the door in her face. I shut the door anyway. I heard her sobbing as she walked away, and even though I knew it was manipulative, I still felt a stab of guilt. Not even an hour later, I got a text from Amy. It was the usual, how I was tearing the family apart, how heartless I'd become. She accused me of making our mother cry and causing all this drama. It was like she didn't see that our mother had created this mess herself. I felt like I was in a no-win situation, with both of them playing the victim card. The next morning, I got another message from my mother, but this one was different. It was shorter, more direct, and she hinted at needing help with some unexpected expenses. That's when it clicked. This whole reconciliation attempt wasn't about making things right. It was about money. Amy's financial troubles had drained my mother's bank account, and now she was looking to me as a solution. I knew then that I needed to take this seriously. This wasn't going to stop unless I made it clear that my boundaries were firm. I started looking into getting a restraining order. I'd already told her to leave me alone, but she showed up at my home anyway. It felt like she was pushing to see how far she could go. I made an appointment with a lawyer, just to see what my options were. I knew it might escalate things, but I couldn't keep letting her violate my boundaries. Meanwhile, the family gossip had reached a new level. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years were messaging me, acting shocked that I'd cut off contact with my mother. They'd heard her version of events, but I'd abandoned her out of nowhere, that I was being petty and cruel. It was exhausting, but thankfully my friends were there for me. They reminded me of how far I'd come and how much progress I'd made. They told me not to let my mother undo all the healing I'd done. My father reached out again, too. He shared more stories about the manipulation he experienced during their marriage. He told me about the guilt trips, the financial control, and how she'd turned the family against him when they divorced. He encouraged me to stand my ground and assured me that I wasn't alone in this. Then came the final straw. At a family gathering I didn't attend, my mother had a complete meltdown. I saw videos of it later, shared by relatives on social media. She was crying, saying how I'd cut her out of my life, making herself look like the victim. It worked. Everyone there rushed to comfort her, and I was painted as the villain. A few days later, my aunt sent me an ultimatum, reconcile with my mother, or the family would cut me off completely. That was it for me. I knew I had to take control of the narrative. I wrote a detailed message to the family group chat, explaining everything: years of favoritism, manipulation, and the college fund betrayal. I hit send, then waited, knowing it was about to get chaotic. Update 2. The moment I sent that message to the family group chat, it was like lighting a fuse. The fallout was immediate. Notifications were pinging nonstop as relatives piled in with their reactions. Most of them were angry, claiming I was fabricating everything. They called me ungrateful, accused me of being disrespectful to my mother, and a few even threw in that classic line, "She did her best as a single mom." It was exactly what I expected. Older family members rallying around her, blind to the years of favoritism and manipulation I had laid out. But then, something surprising happened. My phone buzzed with a string of private messages from a few younger cousins. They admitted they'd noticed the favoritism all along but never felt they could speak up. One of them even mentioned how they'd seen our mother buy Amy a brand new car, right after telling me she couldn't afford to help with my college textbooks. They said they were sorry for not supporting me sooner, and that they'd back me up if I needed it. It felt like a small victory in the middle of the chaos, knowing at least a few people had seen the truth all these years. Meanwhile, Amy started blowing up my phone. She was sending message after message, switching between guilt-tripping and outright accusing me of stirring up drama for attention. She claimed our mother had always been fair, that I was exaggerating, and that my victim narrative was getting old. The texts were relentless, almost like she was trying to wear me down into taking back everything I'd said. But I wasn't going to let her off that easily. I knew I needed to gather concrete evidence if I was going to fight back against this smear campaign. I spent the next few days digging through old messages, photos, and financial records. I found receipts and bank statements showing how my mother had paid for Amy's extravagant expenses, fancy vacations, designer clothes, even paying off credit card debt. There were emails from when I was in college, asking for help with tuition, where she responded with excuses about how money was tight. Meanwhile, there were photos on social media of her taking Amy shopping at high-end stores. The contrast was glaring. I considered sharing these publicly within the family, just to show I wasn't making anything up. During my next therapy session, I brought up everything that had happened. I went over the group chat, the messages from my aunts, and the confrontation with Amy. My therapist helped me see something I hadn't fully realized before, that this wasn't about love or even about reconnecting. It was about control. My mother and Amy couldn't stand that I had set boundaries and broken free from their narrative. This realization gave me a renewed sense of resolve. I wasn't going to be manipulated back into the fold. Out of nowhere, I got a message from an aunt I hadn't spoken to in years. She'd been cut off by the family long ago for reasons I never really understood, but after seeing my message in the group chat, she reached out. She told me about her own experiences with our mother, how she'd been ostracized for not going along with the family's expectations. She said she believed me and offered her support, saying she knew exactly how manipulative our mother could be. It was validating to hear, especially from someone who had faced the same treatment. But while I was gaining support from unexpected places, my mother was busy spreading her own version of events. I started hearing from more relatives who'd gotten individual phone calls from her. She'd been crying on the phone, telling them how she was a devoted mother who'd sacrificed everything for her daughters, only for me to turn my back on her. It was the same sob story she'd been peddling for years, and it was working. Most of them believed her and started messaging me to ask why I was being so heartless. That's when I decided to confront Amy directly. We met at a coffee shop, a neutral location where I knew we wouldn't be overheard. I laid out all the evidence I had gathered, the financial records, the photos, everything. Amy's confidence wavered as she looked through it. She started off defensive, claiming it wasn't what it looked like, but as I pressed on, she began to crack. In the heat of the moment, she let something slip. She admitted that our mother had used my college fund for her wedding because she deserved it more. I couldn't believe it. All these years, she had played dumb, acting like she didn't know why the money was gone. And now, here she was, confessing it without even realizing what she'd said. I felt a wave of anger but also relief. I had the truth now, straight from her mouth. I'd been recording the conversation on my phone. I felt conflicted about it, but I knew I might need this proof to defend myself against the family's backlash. I couldn't risk them twisting her words or denying what she'd just admitted. Just when I thought things couldn't escalate further, my mother showed up at my door again, this time with a gift basket and a tearful apology. She was playing the part of the remorseful mother perfectly, saying she wanted to make amends, but as soon as I didn't immediately accept her apology, the tone shifted. She gave me an ultimatum: drop all of this and forgive her, or be permanently cut off from the family. I didn't take the bait. I knew this was just another tactic to manipulate me back into submission. I told her I was done, that I was going no contact for good. I shut the door in her face and blocked her number. The backlash from the extended family was immediate and intense. My grandmother called, crying, saying the family was falling apart because of me. Relatives were messaging me non-stop, trying to guilt-trip me into making things right. I was exhausted, but I wasn't backing down. I realized I had one last move. I drafted a final message for the family chat, attaching the recording of Amy's confession. I hovered over the send button, hesitating. I knew once I sent it, there'd be no going back. Update 3. The morning after I drafted the message, I woke up to something I wasn't prepared for: a full-blown smear campaign against me on social media. My mother and Amy had taken to Facebook and Instagram, posting vague, emotional statuses about being betrayed by a loved one and how family loyalty means nothing anymore. They didn't mention me by name, but it was clear who they were talking about. The posts were filled with crying emojis, photos of the two of them hugging, and captions about unconditional love. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Within hours, my inbox was flooded. Family, friends, and distant relatives messaged me, some asking what was going on, while others outright accused me of airing dirty laundry and dragging the family through the mud. A few were supportive, saying they always suspected there was more to the story, but most were critical. One relative went as far as to say, family issues should stay private. You're tearing everyone apart with this drama. It felt like they'd taken my mother's bait, hook, line, and sinker. I knew I needed to get ahead of this, so I called my lawyer. I explained the situation, the social media posts, and the ongoing harassment. He advised me to start documenting everything: screenshots of posts, messages, and any public statements they made. He warned me that my mother's behavior could escalate if she felt cornered, and I needed to be prepared for a potential defamation case. He assured me that the evidence I'd gathered so far was strong, but we couldn't take any chances. Later that day, things took an even crazier turn. I was at work, trying to focus, when Amy showed up unannounced. She stormed into the office, visibly upset. I barely had time to react before she started shouting about how I was destroying the family and accusing me of attacking our mother online. My coworkers stopped what they were doing and stared, unsure of what was happening. Amy was crying, pleading with me to make it stop, saying I needed to take everything back and apologize publicly. It was a complete spectacle, and I felt humiliated. My manager had to step in and escort her out of the building. I went to the bathroom afterward, trying to collect myself, but the damage was done. The whole office was buzzing about it for the rest of the day. That evening, I got an unexpected email from my father. He'd been quietly digging into financial records from when I was a teenager, trying to help me in any way he could. He attached a few documents he found, bank statements showing that money meant for my education had been funneled into a joint account with Amy's name on it. It was right there in black and white. The funds that were supposed to be for my college tuition had been used to support Amy's lifestyle instead. My father didn't say much in the email, just that he was sorry he hadn't realized it sooner. I decided to meet up with my estranged aunt for coffee. She'd reached out after seeing the family group chat message, offering her support. We hadn't spoken in years, but she had her own story of being cut off by the family. Over coffee, she shared documents and receipts, further backing up what I'd found. She told me how our mother had a history of manipulating finances, playing the victim, and cutting off anyone who didn't fall in line. She said she believed me, and was willing to testify if it ever came to that. Meanwhile, my mother was still working her angle. She attended a family gathering I wasn't invited to and made a huge scene, sobbing about how I'd ruined her life. She was wailing, saying she didn't know what she'd done to deserve this treatment from her own daughter. A cousin recorded the whole thing and posted it online. The video quickly gained traction, with sympathetic comments flooding in about what a heartless daughter I was. It was hard to watch, but I saved the video as more evidence. The smear campaign was taking its toll on me. I felt like I was being attacked from all sides, and for a moment I started second-guessing myself. It felt overwhelming, like I was in a losing battle against a narrative that had already been set. But then I received a series of messages from a group of cousins who had faced similar favoritism from their parents. They told me their own stories and encouraged me to keep standing up for myself. It was a small but much-needed boost. Out of the blue, Amy called me. She was crying, saying she'd been manipulated by her mother, claiming she had no idea the extent of the financial mismanagement. She begged for forgiveness, saying she was just as much a victim in all of this. It sounded sincere, but the timing was suspicious. Right after I'd uncovered the financial records, I didn't respond right away. I needed time to process whether this was genuine remorse or just another attempt to control the narrative. The next day, I received a letter from a lawyer representing my mother. It was a formal threat, accusing me of defamation and demanding I stop spreading false information. It was laughable, considering I had the receipts, literal and figurative. I wasn't going to be intimidated by empty threats, not when I knew I had concrete evidence to back me up. I decided it was time to make a public statement. I crafted a carefully worded post on social media, not revealing specific details but emphasizing my right to protect my mental health and set boundaries. I talked about years of manipulation, favoritism, and why I had chosen to go no contact. The response was overwhelming. Support from people who had been through similar situations, validation from strangers, and a noticeable split within my own family. Some relatives sided with me, finally seeing the patterns for themselves, while others doubled down, refusing to believe anything against my mother. Just when I thought things might start to settle, I got a message from a lawyer saying my mother wanted to settle things privately before it escalated to court. I stared at the email, unsure whether this was a genuine attempt at resolution or just another manipulation tactic to shut me up.
Update 4. After receiving the message from my mother's lawyer about settling things privately, I knew I couldn't ignore this any longer. I contacted my own attorney and set up a meeting. He reviewed everything and advised me to take this seriously. It wasn't just a bluff. He suggested we prepare for litigation, just in case. He helped me draft a response that made it clear I wouldn't be bullied into silence. The letter we sent back included a firm statement. I was prepared to defend myself with evidence if necessary. The next few days were spent gathering every piece of evidence I had. I pulled together screenshots of the manipulative texts, the recording of Amy admitting the truth about the college fund, financial records my father had sent, and testimonies from my estranged aunt. It was a mountain of proof showing years of favoritism, financial misconduct, and manipulation. My lawyer reviewed it all, and for the first time in a long time I felt like I wasn't fighting this battle alone. He was confident that we had a strong case if my mother decided to push forward. Word of the potential legal action spread quickly through the extended family. It was like gasoline on a fire. Relatives started taking sides more openly. Some called me shocked, saying they couldn't believe the extent of what I'd uncovered. Others doubled down, insisting that it was all lies and that I was just out to hurt my mother. It was a chaotic mess, but I stayed focused, knowing I had the truth on my side. Amy reached out again, but this time she sounded different. It wasn't the defensive, accusatory tone she'd used before. She sounded desperate. She admitted that she'd been manipulated by our mother for years, that she'd lied to protect her, and now she was ready to testify on my behalf if the case went to court. I didn't know whether to believe her sudden change of heart. It felt like she was acting out of self-preservation, but I couldn't ignore the fact that her support could be a game changer if this went to trial. Then my father dropped a bombshell. He called me one night, sounding more serious than I'd ever heard him. He admitted that he'd known about the financial manipulation for years. He explained that during the divorce, the settlement had included a clause that prevented him from interfering with how my mother handled the money. He said he'd tried to fight it at the time, but ultimately gave in to avoid a prolonged legal battle. He expressed regret for not protecting my interests better and said he was willing to testify if it came down to it. It was another piece of the puzzle falling into place, but it left me wondering how deep this deception really went. A few days later, I got a call from my lawyer. My mother had agreed to a face-to-face mediation. It wasn't a court appearance, but it was the next step before things escalated legally. My lawyer advised me to stay calm and stick to the facts. I agreed, even though I knew it would be emotionally draining. The mediation was a disaster from the start. My mother walked in already playing the victim. She started crying almost immediately, talking about how I was destroying the family, how she'd sacrificed everything for us. It was the same performance I'd seen 1,000 times before. I sat there, letting her words wash over me, until it was my turn to speak. I calmly presented the evidence, screenshots, financial documents, and the recorded confession from Amy. Just as I finished, the door opened, and in walked Amy. She wasn't scheduled to be there, but she showed up anyway. My mother's face went pale as Amy took a seat next to me. Without any hesitation, Amy corroborated everything I'd said. She admitted that our mother had pressured her to lie, that she'd been complicit in the manipulation for years, but she couldn't do it anymore. She even provided additional details about how our mother funneled money into secret accounts under her name. It was like a scene from a movie. My mother, caught completely off guard, had no response. The room went silent for a moment before my mother erupted. She started screaming about how she'd sacrificed everything for us, how we were ungrateful, and how she'd been betrayed by her own daughters. It was a full meltdown. Her lawyer quickly stepped in, trying to end the meeting before things got worse, realizing the case was slipping through his fingers. The next day, I received an email from my mother's lawyer with a settlement offer. They were willing to pay a significant sum and stop all harassment if I agreed to sign a non-disclosure agreement (NDA). It was clear they were trying to avoid a public court battle. My lawyer reviewed the offer and said it was generous, but he left the decision up to me. He pointed out that taking the settlement would end the conflict quickly, but it would mean staying silent forever. I spent the next few days thinking it over. I spoke to my cousins who had been supporting me throughout this ordeal. They told me not to take the NDA, that it would be like erasing everything I'd fought for. They shared their own stories of manipulation within their families and thanked me for standing up. It was eye-opening to see how many people had suffered in silence. Finally, I met with Amy one last time. She looked exhausted, like the weight of everything was finally hitting her. She apologized sincerely, saying she felt trapped by our mother's control for so long. She insisted she wanted to help me, even if it meant losing our mother's support forever. It felt genuine, but I still couldn't fully trust her motives. In the end, I made my decision. I rejected the settlement and refused to sign the NDA. I posted a final update on my private social media, thanking everyone who had supported me and announcing my decision to let the truth come out in court if it needed to. I wasn't going to let them silence me. Just as I hit post, my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice shaking with rage. She screamed that I'd regret this, that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I hung up, feeling a strange mix of fear and relief. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. Update 5. The court date was set, and there was no turning back. My mother tried to delay the proceedings with excuses and motions to reschedule, but the judge wasn't having it. He reviewed the mountain of evidence my lawyer had already presented and decided there was no need for delays. It was clear this wasn't just a petty family dispute. It was a case of serious financial misconduct and manipulation. As the date approached, the family split became even more apparent. The once solid group chat was now dead silent, except for a few relatives who messaged me privately. Some apologized for not believing me sooner, saying they were shocked by the financial documents and testimonies that had come to light. Others, however, doubled down, insisting I was just out for revenge. It was exhausting, but at least now I knew who I could trust. The courtroom was packed when the trial finally began. My mother entered with her lawyer, looking every bit the part of a devastated parent. Amy showed up too, but this time she wasn't sitting with our mother. She took her place on my side of the courtroom, and the whispers began immediately. It was the first time she'd openly chosen me over our mother, and it sent shockwaves through the room. I could see my mother's lawyer scrambling, already thrown off by Amy's unexpected presence. The first day was tense. I took the stand and shared my story in detail, presenting the evidence we'd gathered: texts, financial records, the recorded confession. The judge listened carefully, asking a few pointed questions, but mostly letting the evidence speak for itself. Then it was Amy's turn. She walked to the stand, took a deep breath, and began speaking. She didn't hold back. She talked about the years of manipulation, how her mother had pressured her to lie, and how she'd been complicit out of fear of losing her favor. Amy explained how our mother funneled money into secret accounts under her name, how the college fund had been drained without my knowledge, and how she'd gone along with it because she thought it was what she had to do. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of my mother's muffled sobs. My mother's lawyer tried to discredit Amy, suggesting she was only saying these things to save herself. But Amy held firm, providing explicit examples and dates that matched the financial records. The turning point came when she mentioned the joint account, something only someone involved would know. It left the opposing lawyer scrambling, clearly unprepared for this level of detail. When my mother took the stand, it was like watching a scripted performance. She sobbed, claiming she'd only ever done what was best for her daughters, that she was being painted as a villain by her own flesh and blood. She talked about sacrifices, about being a single mother who had to make hard choices. The judge, however, wasn't moved. He pointed out the inconsistencies between her statements and the documented evidence, especially the financial records and Amy's testimony. The verdict was swift. The judge ruled in my favor, citing clear evidence of financial misconduct and manipulation. My mother was ordered to pay restitution for the diverted college fund, and the attempt to coerce me into signing an NDA was declared void. The courtroom erupted into murmurs as the ruling was read. I glanced over at my mother. She looked stunned, like she couldn't believe this was happening. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, including a few reporters who'd caught wind of the family drama. My mother had a complete breakdown, screaming at the cameras about how she'd been betrayed by her own children. The footage went viral almost immediately, shared and reshared across social media. The comments were a mix of sympathy for her and harsh criticism, with people pointing out the evidence that had been presented in court. It was a surreal moment, watching her unravel like that in front of everyone. Amy decided to make a public statement of her own. She posted a video on her social media, apologizing to me and taking full accountability for her role in the manipulation. She explained how she'd been a victim of our mother's control as well, how she'd lied and covered things up out of fear. It was raw and emotional, and it went viral too. People were quick to offer support, saying it was brave of her to come clean, even though it was long overdue. The extended family, the ones who had sided with my mother, went silent. A few of them reached out with apologies, but I chose not to respond. I couldn't bring myself to reopen those wounds. The damage had already been done, and I needed to focus on healing, not on mending relationships with people who'd refused to see the truth. I started intensive therapy shortly after the court case ended. It was a lot to process, Years of manipulation, the stress of the legal battle, and the emotional toll of going up against my own family. But I finally felt like I was on the right path. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, wondering when the next attack would come. I made the decision to cut ties with my mother completely. I blocked her on every platform, changed my phone number, and even moved to a new apartment. It felt like a weight had lifted off my shoulders. Amy decided to go no contact as well. We began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship, starting with honest conversations and attending therapy sessions together. It wasn't easy, but we both knew it was the only way forward. In my final post on Reddit, I reflected on everything that had happened. I thanked everyone who had supported me, both online and in real life. I shared some of the lessons I'd learned about boundaries, self-respect, and the importance of standing up for the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As I write this, I'm planning a move to a new city, ready to start fresh. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this: I stood up for myself when it mattered most. I chose truth over silence, even when it cost me everything. And for that, I have no regrets. If anyone reading this is going through something similar, my advice is simple: trust your instincts, set your boundaries, and protect your own well-being, no matter the cost.